Alrighty, well, thank you so much for checking in again with us as we continue to read Better Dad, Stronger Sons by Rick Johnson. This is the Better Dad Show, where we endeavor to become better dads for our kids, better husbands for our wives, and better men for the world. So I am your host, Bill Hutchison. You can always find the videos and audio as well as links to how you can subscribe to the podcast by heading over to betterdadshow.com. If you head over there, you can check it out and just see, find the book and follow along with us. We are up to chapter 4 of the book. We will read it and then discuss it as we go. If you have any comments, you can leave a chat, whether on Instagram, Twitch, Facebook, YouTube, or DLive. We've got it going live on all of those locations at the moment. And you can find links to all those over at betterdadshow.com. So we'll continue reading now. Actually, I guess before we do that, I'm just wondering if any of you had a chance after listening to chapter 3 last week to go through the questions, which was dealing with any unresolved issues you might have had to do with your relationship with your own father or with your heavenly Father. What are some of the things that might be sitting on the relationship you have with them? So if you haven't yet, you can head on back. You can listen from the introductory chapter at betterdadshow.com, and you can then answer all the questions, and you can also find links to the book if you don't have a copy of the book yet. So we will go with chapter 4, which is called Bonding with Your Boy. So bonding with your boy. Until you have a son of your own, you will never know the joy, the love beyond feeling that resonates in the heart of a father as he looks upon his son. You will never know the sense of honor that makes a man want to be more than he is and to pass something good and hopeful in the hands of his son. And you will never know the heartbreak of the father who are haunted by personal demons that keep them from being the men they want their sons to be. That's the quote, from the beginning of the chapter from Kent Nerber, Letters to My Son. And I think that you hear that so many from different men, just how much of a change and how much of a challenge it is as they become fathers. How much we want to be better than we were. We want to accomplish more. We want to provide more. And we want to really make a difference in the world. And just how much of that is because of our children. And we will continue. I nearly popped all the buttons off my shirt when my son was born. I was so proud. I would have been happy to have a healthy child of either gender, but deep in my heart, I was secretly delighted to have a male heir to pass along my bloodline, especially the first time out of the chute. Well, the visions I had for his future potential, would he be a Major League Baseball player or the head of a large corporation? Maybe he'd be a university professor. Heck, he might even be president of the United States. Could happen. Not my kids, but maybe yours. I carefully chose the name with the flexibility to fit either a professional athlete or a captain of industry. I played it over and over in my mind, savoring how it would sound as I pictured him shooting out a manly, powerful hand and a confident greeting. Frank Johnson, pleased to meet you. Kind of silly, huh? But a man is mighty proud when his loins spawns a son to carry on his legacy. But that's the easy part. Then begins the hard work of molding him into a man the rest of the world will look up to. And it can't happen with full effectiveness unless he bonds with you, his father. Why bond? What's the big deal about bonding with our sons anyways? After all, most of our fathers and their fathers before them were never that concerned about the whole bonding issue. They didn't make a big deal of it because it used to be built into life. Before the Industrial Revolution took men out of the home, fathers walked side by side with their sons just about 24 hours a day. That allowed father and son to bond simply as a natural result of living life. It also taught the son how to be a man through continual interaction with an adult male. But most of us don't live on farms anymore, so why is it important these days that we bond with our sons? But bonding with our sons, we are giving them life as men. Sons actively seek to form bonds with their fathers. They desperately need the nourishment or father food they get from dad. Your son was born with an incredible God-given urge to admire and worship his father. Why else are little boys always strutting around the playground, saying things like, "My dad can whip your dad"? Why else do boys instinctively imitate their dads? I saw a little guy down the street the other day following along behind his dad as he mowed the lawn. The little tyke was pushing his toy lawnmower right behind in his father's footsteps, imitating every move. A boy needs his father to show him how life is to be lived. He needs his father to show him what a man's responsibilities are and to pass on convictions that will guide him. In his father, he needs both a model and a teacher. A boy longs for his father. Kent Hughes says it this way. You've just finished a run, and you're sitting on the porch, sweating like a horse and smelling like one, and your son, or perhaps a little neighbor boy, sits down next to you, leans against you and says, "You smell good." This is the primal longing for one's father. Fathers are a necessity to their sons. Proverbs 17:6 says, "The glory of sons is their father." The word glory in this text is a Hebrew word that literally means weight. So we might read the verse, "The weightiness of sons is their fathers." A father who defines masculine boundaries for his son and paints a picture of healthy manhood gives his son weight or substance in life. Boys who don't receive this information become featherweights, lacking stability. They're easily blown away by any gust of cultural or peer pressure that comes along. Boys who have a physically or emotionally absent father are always trying to figure out life. They have no one to turn to for advice. This creates anger and frustration in a young man. Preston Gillam says, "Men are a complex mix of extremes. Treat a man poorly if you are not close to his heart, and he will shrug you off. But tread on his dreams, and you wound him profoundly. Disrespect him from the distance, and he pities you. But question his worth as one who has access to his soul, and you possess the power to jeopardize his sense of identity. He is tough, resilient, driving, and independent, but molded through close, timely dependence upon his father and older mentors. Disturb his routine, and he flexes. Disrupt the delicate transition from boyhood to manhood, and he suffers immeasurably." By bonding with our sons, we help protect them from much of the suffering caused by the slurs and challenges the world slings at them. When a son bonds with his father, he finds a larger-than-life figure whom he instinctively looks up to, and having a hero provides courage for life's battles. Kids picking on me at school, no problem. Dad'll tell you how to handle it. Girls acting weird around me, I'll get some advice from Dad. Can't figure out how to solve a problem? I'll ask Dad. If Dad's there, everything will be okay in a boy's mind. Dad is an older male who loves him and encourages him no matter what the rest of the world thinks. When Dad is not around, a boy is forced to face the harsh world alone, with no one in his court to help shield or coach him. He's left without someone to understand him, his hurts, someone to commiserate with. A boy who lives with Dad's protective sphere of influence finds a safe refuge where he can regroup, lick his wounds, and heal. When you consider the absence of men in so many children's life nowadays, you can just sort of picture how much of a impact that would have. And you can just read just how important it is. So there's a little aside to this one that says absent or disconnected fathers can create in boys anger and pain or suppressed rage, extreme behaviors, addictions, or obsessions, sense of lostness, indecisiveness, or lack of direction. Can also lead to homosexuality. Sensitive boys are especially wounded deep by the break with their father. Continue to read. A father who affirms his children gives them the gift of confidence and self-esteem throughout life. It's part of the power that God has given men, power to lift up others or to destroy them. Early in Jesus' ministry, he approached John the Baptist and asked to be baptized. Immediately upon emerging from the water, Jesus heard his heavenly Father say, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Matthew 3:17. God was saying to him, "I'm proud of you, son. Well done, good job." Clearly, God set an example here for all fathers of sons. People grow, mature, and reach their potential as they are affirmed. People build much of their sense of self-worth based on affirmation or the lack of it. Sons get enough harassment and negative input from their peers and the culture at large. Fathers need to counteract that negative input, not add to it. Our words have powers, don't they, as husbands and as fathers? Everyone needs a cheering section. Your affirmation of your son counts for more than a stadium full of other people rooting for him. Unfortunately, most of us have our hands full providing for our families, and this can easily keep us away from home for most waking hours of the day. Despite that obstacle, here are some ways I've discovered that can form lasting bonds with their sons. Now here's another side. What every boy wants from his dad. Time together with Dad, this creates experiences and memories. Direction from Dad with solid why answers, not just because I told you so answers. Convictions that come from modeling. What do you really believe? What do we believe as a family? And to see God's heart. What's important in life to a man. So, things we can do to form lasting bonds with our sons. Physical activities. Camping, hunting, fishing, sports, scouting, rafting, hiking, biking, climbing, church camps, and other outdoor activities all provide the physical outlet the male animal craves while allowing us to build strong father-son relationships. These type of experiences provide opportunities for fathers and sons to create memories that last a lifetime, memories that can be passed on from one generation to another. Another type of activity is a hobby that you can both enjoy, such as collecting stamps, coins, baseball cards, etc., working on cars or small engines, wood or metal shop, attending sporting events, household maintenance, reading together, yard work and gardening, bird watching, miniature trains, model airplanes, wood carving, or just walking together. These are all great ways to bond. I have a friend named Jim with whom I go hunting, hiking, and camping. Jim frequently pushes the envelope in his manly endeavors. More than once, I've questioned my sanity while hanging off the side of some craggy cliff with him in the middle of nowhere. We're making memories is Jim's favorite rejoinder. That doesn't always satisfy me at the time, but Jim's right. When all is said and done at the end of our time on earth, we're left with the memories of our life well lived, or not. And throughout their lives, our sons' most lasting memories are those of time spent with Dad, often sharing in some physical activity. Frank was 11 years old when we began hunting together with a group of men and their sons. I've always enjoyed the outdoors, and Frank was a Boy Scout for several years. Consequently, both of us were experienced outdoorsmen and were familiar with guns, but neither of us had ever been hunting before. Oregon required kids to go through a hunter safety course in order to draw a tag for their first hunt at age 12. So Frank tagged along to learn the ropes that first year. Little did he know, I didn't know the ropes myself. But my swollen masculine ego wouldn't allow me to admit to him that I didn't have a clue about how to hunt deer. After getting up at the crack of dawn 3 days running and never even seeing a buck, Frank and I were getting a little discouraged. We did see several does and were awestruck with the sudden appearance of a majestic, earth-shaking herd of elk thundering down the mountainside 100 yards off. The eastern Oregon weather was unseasonably warm that October, and the third day was sunny with t-shirt temperatures as we headed out for a late afternoon hunt. My plan was to find a flat spot to lie down and take a nice, relaxing nap. Frank and I found a log beneath the copse of pine trees and sat down facing opposite directions. I was drowsing in the warm afternoon sun when I heard Frank urgently whisper with increasing intensity, "Buck, buck, 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 buck!" I bolted awake. Turning, I spied a forked horn slowly ambling across our field of vision about 60 yards downslope from our blind. As I sighted him in, he nimbly stepped behind a tree, as if knowing he was being watched. I knew the big mule deer would bolt as he left the safety of the tree, so I aimed several yards on the other side. Suddenly he leaped from behind the tree, bounding at a full gallop. As soon as he entered my sights, I fired. The buck neither stumbled nor broke stride as he continued up and over a knoll out of sight. Adrenaline rushed through my body. My pulse thundered in my ears. I spoke, but then realized I couldn't hear my own voice because of the deafening roar of the rifle blast. I think I missed him. How could I have missed him at this close range? I lamented. If it had been me shooting, you can bet I wouldn't have missed, Frank muttered, slightly disgusted. Sounds like an eldest child, doesn't it? As we searched the area where the buck had been for bloodstains or hair, Frank continued to chide me on my poor marksmanship. I could have made that shot easy, Dad. After searching for nearly a half hour and not finding any blood spots, I turned away in discouragement. But Frank refused to give up. His faith in his father remained intact, notwithstanding his criticism of my shooting. Suddenly Frank shouted, "Dad, blood!" Sure enough, he'd found a small rock soaked with still moist blood. At Frank's insistence, we combed the area in a grid pattern, looking for more stains. Every time we were just about to quit, Frank found another blood spot. After 50 yards or so, the stains grew bigger and closer together. As we crested a knoll, Frank yelled, "Dad, there he is!" Sure enough, there was the buck, lying in a little depression where he'd finally stumbled and fallen. Being greenhorns, we hadn't realized the deer had run a significant distance even after being shot through the heart as ours had been. As is usually the case, our walkie-talkie batteries decided it was a good time to give out. Unable to call for our more experienced compadres to come help gut and field dress the animal, it was up to us first-timers to complete the task by trial and error. Luckily, I'd been paying attention when the old sourdough Bobs had been explaining the procedure to another rookie back at camp the night before. When our brother hunters did finally come upon us, we had the deer field dressed and nearly ready to transport back to camp. Blood up to our elbows, we basked in the glory of our friends' whooping praises and poised with our prize for the obligatory pictures. It was a scene that has played out countless times since the beginning of mankind. Frank and I have hunted every year for the past 7 years. Neither of us has bagged another buck during that time, but we sure look forward to hunting season every year. About 2 months beforehand, we both start getting antsy and checking our gear to make sure everything is in order. That first experience, working together as a team, I the hunter, Frank the tracker, together overcoming trials we'd never experienced before, cemented our relationship for the rest of our lives. I look forward to sitting by the light of some future hunting campfire, spinning yards to my grandson about the first big hunt for his dad and me. It was a time neither of us will forget. Tough times. Tea break. Tough times. This is a long chapter. So, before we move on to tough times, it's probably good to really think about some of the physical things we can do with our kids. Are we doing enough? Are we actually setting aside the time that we should be for that? So, I'm probably not. My youngest is probably the best at the moment with actually coming to me and asking me to do stuff. I think the older ones have kind of outgrown me, but the youngest one will often come up to me, especially at the end of the day, and say, "Hey, Dad, can we do this? Or can we do that? Can we play a game? Can we do some Lego?" And it's good. It's much too easy for me, though, to say, "No, I have to work," or "No, I need to edit some audio," or "I need to, clean the house," or stuff like that. But it's good to remember just how important it is for us to actually take that time, especially if the kids want it. Enjoy the fact that they still want time with you. So it won't happen forever. All right, tough times. Nothing draws men or boys together more closely than going through difficult experience together. As we bear each other's burdens, we develop a bond that survives through life's future challenges. That's one of the advantages of performing physical activity together, stretching yourselves to attempt to conquer rigorous adventures. Rest assured, life will sling its share of tough times at you. And when you stand side by side with your son during the trials and tribulations of childhood and adolescence, you develop a bond that helps protect him later in life. Realizing that he has a dad who stands behind him gives your son the self-confidence to tackle seemingly insurmountable odds and attempt great things. While being your son's advocate is vitally important, so is maintaining high expectations of him. Sometimes you need to set up challenges for your son. For instance, we have a huge backyard. By about age 11, Frank was finally ready and more than willing to start mowing the lawn all alone. Susan, of course, was petrified that he was going to chop his foot off with the mower, but I let him stagger and stumble his way over the hilly terrain of our yard on his own. Not only that, but when he was finished, sweaty and exhausted, I made him go back and redo the areas he'd missed, as well as trim all the borders of the yard. I did this all under my wife's disapproving eye. At some point, your son needs to be turned loose to accomplish certain tasks, like mowing the lawn, making household repairs, working on the car, or budgeting his allowance all by himself. He needs to be challenged by being taught how to perform tasks that are difficult, then made to finish them and do them well. Being challenged and held accountable for these little tasks teaches him the skills needed to persevere through tougher situations later in life. Also, letting him work through difficult circumstances on his own, like making him work to pay for the window he broke throwing a baseball, teaches him to be responsible for his actions. Sometimes this creates tension between you and your son. It'd be much easier to let him be less than he's capable of being, but stay the course. When your son knows you have confidence in him, he will internalize the image you have of him, an image of competent, hard-working young man. Your son has a God-given internal drive to make you proud of him. Every son wants to live up to his father's name. Every son wants to be so solid, courageous, tender, and capable that his father, beyond all others, will say to him, "You've lived up to your name, son. I'm proud of you." John Maxwell says it like this: "Only when we are tested under pressure do we discover the true nature and depth of our character. By never letting our son suffer through tough times, we rob him of the joy and reward of developing strong character. People can say anything they want about their values, but when the pressure is on, they discover what their values really are. That's why resisting the urge to rescue our sons all the time is important. A fine line exists between being supportive and enabling. Your son needs to learn early on to be accountable for his actions, accountable not only to you, but to the world at large. His decisions as a man will have far-ranging ramifications. He needs to know that while you are always his dad and will be there for him, he will also be subject to the consequences of his decisions. The sooner he learns that lesson, the easier life will become. I've learned to value the lessons God teaches me through trials. Had I been rescued from hardship by a rich daddy or allowed to succeed in the socio-economic level I desired, I might never have been open to following God's will for me. God used tough experiences to train me to be a good steward of the ministry gifts he has given me. As God's representative on earth, you can help your son learn these lessons early in life. Perhaps God will not find him quite as hard-headed as I have been. Ceremonies. As boys progress through life, they need ceremonies in order to know when they become men. Many men never know when this transition has happened. I certainly didn't. Even after I'd fathered a child, I wasn't sure what made a boy a man. Was it the first time you drank a beer? Maybe when you graduated from college or bought your first car. What about sex? Is that what makes you a man? Your son will go through the same confusion if you don't prepare him for his graduation into manhood. Our culture has done away with many of the ceremonies that used to indicate when a boy became a man. These were signs to let the boy and everyone else know this young buck is on the road to manhood now. It's time to put away childish ways. It's time to start treating him differently and to have higher expectations of him. There's definitely something that I guess us in the Western world don't have is like that ceremony. You hear stories of, Maasai warriors and stuff being sent out and they can't come back until they've killed an animal and stuff like that. And we don't have stuff like that as the West. And we have to almost artificially create it because our life here is so much easier and different than it is out there. Anyways, when my son Frank entered adolescence, I initiated a small ceremony to mark the occasion. He and I went to dinner at a nice restaurant. During dinner, I discussed with him some of the challenges he would face in the next few years. Physical changes his body would undergo, peer pressures he'd face, sexual urges he'd feel, and the confusion girls would present. That doesn't get any easier, does it? I then prayed for him and gave him a purity ring to remind him of our discussion. This ceremony marked the beginning of his journey into manhood. As Frank approached graduation from high school, I was determined to do something significant that would impact his life. About 6 months before his graduation, I began planning a dinner. I asked a group of spiritually mature and deeply devoted men to pray about what advice God would have them impart to a young man on the cusp of manhood. I prayed daily for God to put his blessing on this occasion and to give me the wisdom to prepare an event that would honor both God and my son. When we met for dinner that night, the ceremony affected not only my son, but also every man in attendance. Each man spoke on subjects that God had placed on his heart. They gave Frank advice, spoke of their own mistakes and regrets, and shared from their own experiences about what they felt was important in a man's life. Some men spoke about the importance of friendship, some about the importance of God in their lives, and some about the devastating effects that pornography or abortion had wreaked on their souls. When I spoke, I told Frank that our relationship was now changing, that I would become more of a coach instead of an authority figure in his life, and that we were gradually becoming peers. We recorded the event on videotape so Frank could look back from time to time at the priceless advice he got from those men. I intended to have a similar ceremony just before his wedding day, when a group of I do intend to have a similar ceremony just before his wedding day, when a group of mature, wise men who have each been married for a lengthy period of time can give him their advice on marriage. I'll be taking notes as well. The benefits of these milestones and ceremonies in a boy's life are easy to understand. But what happens when young men are not provided with some sort of ritual to initiate them into manhood? Michael Gurian says, when a male is not provided with rites of passage to mark each of his transitions through adolescence, we can expect him to create rites of passage of his own. Often these rites of passage might include smoking cigarettes, having premarital sex, committing vandalism, or any number of other unhealthy activities to show himself and others that he's becoming a man. When men don't show boys what it means to be a man, the boys make up their own rules and ceremonies. A gang is merely a group of boys searching for their identities as men. The younger members look to older boys, and usually none of them have ever had men in their lives to provide wisdom and be role models. These boys create bizarre, dangerous, and destructive rituals in their quest to prove their manliness. Ceremonies not only mark the stages for your son as he progresses towards manhood, but also provide a great vehicle for you to bond with your boy. Make these ceremonies memorable. This requires planning, creativity, and maybe even some expenditure on your part. Most of all, it requires your time. Time is the most valuable commodity you can give your son. It is more precious than any other gift, material or otherwise, that you can give him. Look for opportunity to initiate your son into manhood so that someday he will not have to ask other men or even his wife, "Am I a man yet?" One man's journey into manhood. All right. Almost there. This is a very long chapter, but we've got another 5 pages to go. One man's journey into manhood. Here's a story that illustrates the power of men initiating boys into the fraternity of men. Just their very presence together represents a sort of mysterious rite of passage. This is a portion of a wonderful article by Bryce Towsley called Deer Camp Dreaming. Back in the Pleistocene era of the 1960s, before Enlightenment brought in so many changes, Vermont deer camps were a man's domain. No ladies, no babies, and no apologies. This was a masculine world filled with a smoky haze, hard drinks, high testosterone, harsh language, and rough jokes. It was a place where a man could cut loose, revert to a hairier time, and act as all men must from time to time, and I longed to be part of it so much I thought I would burst. But to my eternal anguish, the rule at Camp Buckless was that you must be at least 16 years old, and I was several years short of that. Even back then, I was hard to ignore, and by the time I was 12, there was a little rule bending and I was allowed day visits. I used the time to lobby hard for the rules to be relaxed further. I don't know how many floors I swept or how many times I loaded the wood stove, but with some coaxing from my Uncle Butch, the long-standing rule was waived for me, the first of my generation, and I started to hunt from the family deer camp in my 13th year. It's been 36 years, but I remember every detail, how in awe of it all I was. Even today, I can still recall the smell of the camp, a mix of old wood, wet wool, cooking meat, and a blend of tobacco and wood smoke stirred with 1,000 other odors that can only be identified as camp smells until they melded into something unique to that place and time. At night, I would sit concentrating hard so I could remember everything. I'd be perched in the ladder, for it's much too steep to be realistically called stairs, to the loft, and looking down at this group of men that I knew so well, yet who now seemed so strange. I remember listening so carefully to the stories my grandfather and the others were telling in the glories of past hunts, and to the rough jokes that my young mind understood only to the extent that somehow I knew by hearing them I had taken the first step to being accepted as one of the men. I recall the strange and powerful longing that was threatening to devour my guts, a longing to belong to this group, to fit in. I knew that my invited presence was a sign that I was on the road to that acceptance, but I didn't really have a clue how I would tell them I finally got there. I am sure that even when I am very old and my life is behind me, it will still be fresh in my mind how I reveled in that first weekend in camp, and how I tried so hard to please, to fit in, to be one of the guys, all the while knowing in my heart that I was failing. I can still feel the anxiety and the terrorizing knowledge that I would never get it right. How could I know that only time would make it work? I was 13. What did I know about time? I remember so well the excitement of that first night and how the camp seemed to have a life of its own, one fed by the power of these men, a power too strong to be contained. In my youth I could sense it, but it puzzled me. It was, I now understand, the power of anticipation, an anticipation that only can be generated by the waning hours before the deer season opened. That anticipation fueled an excitement that permeated the camp until it filled the available space, overwhelming everybody there, and I knew that no one in that room would ever again have friends as good or as close as those who were with them at the moment. I can still taste the huge grown-up breakfast my Uncle Bud cooked the next morning and the bitterness of the coffee as it scolded my taste buds for the first time in my young life. Old injuries and years of shooting have ruined my eardrums, but even today I can clearly hear the squeak of the snow as we left the camp in the dark, and I remember vividly the stark contrast of the cold and clear northern air to the humid and smoky interior of the camp, and the chill that went through me when we stepped out the door. It's so easy to venture back to that morning on the edge of the hardwoods with my back against the big maple tree, sitting and shivering, but not entirely from the cold. I can feel the cold steel in the dark-stained wood of the old 1892 Winchester that Gramps had loaned to me, amid solemn vows and sworn oaths to treat it like it was the most delicate treasure on earth, because in my mind it truly was. I could smell my father's unfiltered Pall Malls mixing with the sharp chemical odor rising from my own freshly dry-cleaned wool coat, and see the glow as he smoked beside me in the dark. There were days of hunting before that one, and by then I already had a couple of deer to my credit, but I don't think there was ever a day that made more enduring impression. That I was finally hunting from the deer camp made all the difference. There have been many deer hunts in the years between that day and today, and most have faded from memory. That morning, though, remains as vivid as it was in 1968. I remember how boredom replaced excitement as the day played out, but that it didn't seem to matter. I recall, too, how things that are now vexing, or at least mundane, were pure excitement, and how the newness of all the experiences threatened to overwhelm me. The camp was deep in the woods at the end of miles of bad road, a road rutted deep with mud and mined with ledges and hidden boulders. That night we hit a rock that hung the snowplow frame on the old Jeep, and in spite of chains on all four tires, we were stuck. To the others in the truck, it was a reason for more bad language and foul tempers, but for me it was a grand adventure. Later, as we pulled into the camp yard, the dim, mud-crusted headlights swept quickly across a bear that was hanging from the meat pole. That quick, unexpected glimpse scared me breathless, but at the same time, deep down, it excited me. It was true. There were bears lurking in these woods we were hunting. The element of danger, adventure, and excitement stirred by that knowledge generated in my young soul a thirst for it all that was beyond measure and unquenchable even today. That evening, as I sat in my stand listening to the story of the bear, I barely dared to breathe, afraid I might miss a syllable. In the following weeks and years, I spent many happy hours perched halfway up that ladder, and I am sure that it was pivotal in my life direction. These days at deer camp undoubtedly helped to lay the foundation for my lifelong interest in shooting and hunting, an interest that would evolve into my livelihood and, in truth, my life. Perched on that ladder, I felt like I was part of something big, something strange, exotic, mystifying, and oh so desirable. I felt like a member of this Gloria deer hunting fraternity. Give your son the gift of bonding together as you invite him into the fraternity of men, then launch him into the world and see the difference he makes. Questions for reflection and discussion. What kind of physical activities do you participate in with your son? Share with your study group some epic memories of past adventures. You can practice your storytelling. 2, describe a tough time you and your son have been through. How did it end up? 3, if you have a stepson, talk to the other men in your study group about ways you can bond more closely with him. And 4, think about some ceremonies that you can initiate for your son. Plan one or more out, then implement it at the proper time. There we go. So that's the end of chapter 4 of the Better Dad, Stronger Son book. So it does leave us with some challenges, some things that we can look at doing. I think the one about ceremony specifically is one that I need to really think about. You know, I have a 21-year-old and a 13-year-old son, so both at pretty important times in their life. The 13-year-old has just entered high school this year, and our 21-year-old is looking at finishing up uni in the next year and a half or so. So some pretty important times for them. So how can I help to initiate or lead them into manhood? So yeah, some good challenges there. I had actually invited someone else on to read with us this week, but he didn't get back to me. So I'm going to try to give him a bit more warning for next week. Next week, it is called Mistakes All Dads Make. Man, I bet this is a long chapter. 26 pages. So that'll be a nice long one to read. But I'm sure I can add chapters of that myself, as most of us can probably as men. But you know what? God is good and he can redeem it, right? That's what we need to pray for and hope for, because none of us are perfect and we can all do a little bit better. So we will leave it there for today. So again, head over to betterdadshow.com where you can leave comments. Let us know how you are going with the book and with some of these challenges and some of the questions that we get asked. I think what I'll do is I'll start adding the questions at the end to the betterdadshow.com website so that we can check them out and even give answers there, so we can have a discussion. So again, it's betterdadshow.com. If you go there, you will find all of the previous episodes. So you can listen to the previous chapters if you haven't already. And we can look at moving forward and answering some of the questions and challenging ourselves as men so we can be better dads, better husbands, and better men for this planet. So again, thank you very much for joining me. And I look forward to chatting with you again next week.